The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I'm often called both a Muslim terror apologist and an Islamophobe. How one can be both, I don't exactly know. The reality is that most terror in the world is committed by Muslims, but most terror in the U.S. is committed by white, non-Muslim men, mostly Christian, if not by personal religion, certainly by sort of casual upbringing by Christian parents and the celebration, at least casually, of Christian holidays. And if there were ever a counterpoint to the counterproductive and illegal majority Muslim country immigration ban of President Donald Trump, a mass shooting took place on Sunday night at the Islamic Cultural Center of Quebec City in Canada, where 6 people were killed and 17 were injured when a lone gunman started shooting right after evening prayers had ended. And this is a terrorist attack. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called it that. I've not really heard anyone deny that, where the victims were Muslims. And police say that of the 2 men that they had initially had contact with, one has been arrested. The other was determined to have been a witness rather than a suspect. The arrested man, the alleged perpetrator, identified as Alexandre Bissonnette, who is a 20-something-year-old regular white dude, not known to the representatives of the Muslim community at the mosque. He was previously not known to police, but he was known within the city in activist circles as a right-winger who frequently took anti-foreigner and anti-feminist positions, stood up for U.S. President Donald Trump. And it really makes you wonder not only what is the trigger that makes someone go from a sort of online antagonist and casual antagonist to somebody who actually seeks out weapons and end up shooting people. That's a question that's raised here. But of course, it really exposes, even within the context of the Muslim ban, and I get that this is Canada. Okay, I get that. But we've got very similar discussions going on in both countries about these issues. It really makes you say, well, even within the context of the ban, as we talked about yesterday, the primary sources of terrorists for acts committed in the United States, those countries are missing from the list. We talked about Saudi Arabia, we talked about Lebanon, et cetera. But above and beyond that, it remains that there are far more of these white American-born terrorists in the United States, and this one in Canada, than there are what this Muslim immigration ban purports to keep us safe from.
And I think it's very good that Prime Minister Trudeau is calling this out for what it is, because I think a lot of people in the American media aren't willing to do so. It doesn't matter if the act is perpetrated with guns or bombs, or if the person's white, black, whatever the color of their skin is, whatever their nationality. Terrorism is an act perpetrated on the means of religion or politics, and that's clearly what this was.
And it is meant also to be a sort of message to, this was not a message to the individuals that were killed, and there's no evidence whatsoever that individuals were targeted. This was an attack targeted at someone based on their membership in a particular group, in this case, people who are Muslim and go to a mosque. When it's white victims of hate crimes, I called it out a few weeks ago. And in this case, I also am calling it what it is. Now, I went online to different right-wing and pro-Trump enclaves of the internet just to see what was their take on all of this. And I saw that there were comments and discussion threads where the Trumpists and the alt-righters were condemning the attack. They were even talking about, well, maybe we could set up a GoFundMe account for the victims to make sure that this guy isn't associated with our cause. And it sort of made me feel like maybe there was some hope there, even if it was mostly opportunistic and trying to avoid being wrapped in with this guy, which, again, this seems to be a pro-Trump, alt-right, anti-feminist type. That's abundantly clear that that's what he is. Until I started reading some of the more detailed comments where, of course, it was being called a false flag operation to deliberately undermine the Trump Muslim ban. You would think, Pat, that if there was a false flag event like this that they would do it in the United States, not in Canada? Or is that just the deliberate subtlety of the whole thing?
It's part of the false flag operation, yes, that it occurred in a different country. I mean, a subreddit isn't necessarily the best cross-section of Trump supporters, and it's good that some of those people in that community are condemning this attack, but there's always going to be those conspiracy theorists out there.
The other interesting thing that was going on discussion forums online, on right-wing websites, Reddit, etc., was saying, hey, we shouldn't judge all Trump supporters, all alt-righters, all anti-feminists based on the actions of one single extremist terrorist. Where have I heard that before and it was completely ignored by people? Oh, right, in this entire majority Muslim country immigration ban that we've been talking about for the last 48 hours. It was truly stunning. I mean, the hypocrisy, the total cognitive dissonance here, and no indication, again, from the police that anybody else was involved. Some on the right say, I won't talk about attacks when Muslims are the perpetrators. The truth is the opposite. I talk about it all the time. But then some on the left say, I won't talk about stories where Muslims are the victims because, again, I'm an Islamophobe. But again, here I am talking about it. What is abundantly clear here is that this immigration ban of the U.S. That we've been talking about, it's optics and PR. It is not a serious way to keep Americans safer. It is abundantly clear that that's the case, as we have seen the ban start to be talked about positively in the sense of it being a great recruiting tool for many extremist and jihadist and Islamic State associated groups. There is no evidence that it is actually going to make Americans safer. And if that's actually what you care about, then you should be judging it based on that, not on the optics or this arbitrary, it was a promise that Trump is keeping type of thing. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. I've been talking about Trump voters being completely bamboozled by Donald Trump since his election. Donald Trump has stepped away from many of the campaign promises, and then the campaign promises he's gone forward with are, of course, being carried out in a way that is deliberately designed not to actually accomplish the stated goals of those policies, but rather to appeal, again, to the low information Trumpists who will see it as a box checked off on the campaign promise list. We have some fascinating new polling data from PPP, and it polled all Americans and then broke down certain beliefs and opinions based on whether one was a Trump supporter or not. These Trumpists are so confused. They don't think they're confused. They think they found the real truth amidst a completely confusing world of so-called fake news. But it is amazing how these folks have been bamboozled into thinking things that just aren't true. Let's go through some of the data from this poll, Pat. Let's start first with the general question. Do you approve or disapprove of President Trump's job performance? And 44% approve. These numbers match the recent Gallup poll that I told you about within a point or two. Donald Trump reaching more than 50% disapproval in only 8 days, which is really a genuinely notable accomplishment for a president. Okay, next question. What is your opinion of the women who participated in marches across the country this week? This is of all Americans, 50%. Half of all Americans have a favorable opinion of the women's marches. Okay, very good. Let's continue. Next question is, do you think Donald Trump's inauguration had the biggest crowd of any presidential inauguration in history? 62% of respondents correctly identified that no, Donald Trump's inauguration crowd was not the biggest in presidential history. Just under 1 in 5, 18% of all respondents thought yes, Donald Trump had the biggest crowd of any in presidential inauguration history. We know that that is wrong, right? We know that that is an incorrect belief. Keep that in mind. Next, what do you think had a bigger crowd? The Women's March or Donald Trump's inauguration? By a slim majority, most people getting this right, 54% of all Americans believe that, yes, the Women's March had more attendance than Donald Trump's inauguration. That is correct. It did indeed. 29% of all respondents believe that Trump's inauguration had more people show up. Okay, here is where the data starts to get a little bit scary. We are now going to look at the numbers among Trump voters. This is incredibly disturbing, okay? Among Trump voters, do you think Trump's inauguration had the biggest crowd of any presidential inauguration in history? A plurality of Trump voters believe that, yes, Trump's inauguration had record-setting crowd. Now, this is directly connected to the misinformation campaign carried out by Donald Trump and Sean Spicer and Kellyanne Conway, the epitome of alternative facts. And indeed, you'll notice that 34% say yes, Trump had the biggest crowd, 32% say no. That's only 66%. That's because 34% of people are just completely confused and they don't know what the truth is. Okay, so the most common response here is that yes, indeed, Trump had the biggest crowd of any presidential inauguration in history, according to Trump supporters. Just wrong. A plurality between yes and no said, yeah, Trump had the biggest crowd. Let's continue here. Among Trump voters, do you think Trump or Obama had a bigger crowd for his inauguration? 43% of Trump voters believe that Donald Trump had a bigger crowd than President Obama during his inauguration. Completely untrue. Not even close. Donald Trump, a far smaller crowd, inauguration crowd, than Barack Obama. Okay, you might be saying, well, listen, it doesn't really matter what people's opinion is of the crowd. Let's look at some other issues. Okay, well, let's do exactly that. Bigger crowd, Women's March or Trump inauguration among Trump voters. Stunning. 59% of Trump voters believe that Donald Trump's inauguration had a larger crowd than the Women's March. This could not be more false, Pat. And this now goes to the credibility of the Women's March, which has been attacked significantly by the right. I've issued my criticisms of the Women's March, but by and large, overwhelmingly larger crowd there. 6 out of 10 Trumpists believe that Trump's pathetic inauguration attendance was bigger than the Women's March attendance.
It's amazing how in 2017 we need polling information on this. We have the raw data to show how many people attended Trump's inauguration, how many people attended Obama's and the Women's March. But somehow, even though we have those raw data, we still have to interview people and ask their opinions on this.
And get incredibly disturbing answers, I would add. Yeah. Okay. And then lastly, I think this is the last one. Yes. Among Trump voters, probably the most insane. Do you think most of the women who protested this weekend were paid to do so by George Soros? 38%, a plurality of Trump voters, believe that, yes, most of the women protesting in the Women's March were paid by George Soros to do so. Trump supporters, once again, living up to their long-running reputation of being gullible and misinformed. Kellyanne Conway's alternative facts in action. This is very disconcerting. If it's any indication of what's to come for the remainder of Donald Trump's term, if Trump supporters are going to continue being this malleable and manipulatable, Trump's team is going to be able to bend reality for their low information supporters because they eat it up. Now, are the Trump supporters believing the lies because they really just believe anything the Trump administration tells them? Or are they answering these polls by going through the questions and giving the most Trump answer they can find for optics purposes? I don't know, but this still supports the notion that the Trump presidency, the Trump candidacy, and now the presidency, is based on blindness and falsehoods and a sort of denial of basic provable facts. These are not amorphous or hard to pin down realities. These are just simple facts.
I think it's also amazing to compare the polling among the entire American public versus just Donald Trump supporters.
Yeah.
There's such a stark difference there. I mean, it just goes to show that really a slim minority of people support Trump.
Yes, indeed. And it matters not only because of that, but also because we like to think if Trump does crazy stuff, he'll suffer the consequences. He must, right? I mean, the Republican Party controls everything. Anything that goes wrong under Trump, it's going to hurt Trump. But at the same time, it seems as though that isn't necessarily going to be the case. This will be a major uphill battle because Donald Trump and Kellyanne Conway and Bannon and Spicer, they have successfully primed Trumpists to believe anything that comes out of the administration's mouths or Twitter accounts or wherever with no critical thinking whatsoever applied. Trump can actually lose the battle to make America great again, but win the propaganda war. And that should be really concerning to anybody, not on a partisan basis, but anybody who believes that we should have a public that believes simple, provable facts. Major uphill battle that we're fighting here. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter @DPACman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Adam Johnston. Adam, thanks for being a David Pakman Show member. This is viewer-supported, listener-supported media. We exist only if the audience wants us to exist. So please support the work we're doing. It's never been more important than now to have your support. davidpakman.com/membership is where you can sign up. And I'll mention that you can get a significant discount off of normal membership prices. Use it if you'd like a discounted price. I have no problem with as many people as want to using this. Coupon code IVoted17 will give you a big discount. Adam Johnston, today's new member of the day. Okay, you cannot write this stuff. The conservative activist cited by Donald Trump as an authority on voter fraud is Gregg Philipps, okay? This is the guy that in a tweet, which I'll show you, Trump cited as the guy who claims and knows that 3 million people voted illegally for Hillary Clinton. Trump tweeting, "Look forward to seeing final results of VoteStan. Gregg Philipps and crew say at least 3 million voters were illegal. We must do better." Gregg Philipps has been exposed as a completely and utterly deplorable guy. Philipps owes the U.S. government more than $100,000 in unpaid taxes. He claims the number is only $50,000. He was accused of lying about his qualifications on government job applications. He's faced numerous allegations of what's sort of generally described as ethical impropriety. He claims to have been building a database of all voter registrations in the U.S. with location details since 2009, but he's not made those details public. He's posted online about excessive government spending, even though, again, he owes the government somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 in unpaid taxes. And here's the kicker. You just can't write this stuff. He was registered to vote in 3 states during the 2016 election. Again, multiple voter registrations are not illegal if you're only voting in one place. I believe that I'm registered to vote in 2 different cities here in the state of Massachusetts. I only voted in Boston. But this is one of the contentions from Trump that is evidence of so-called voter fraud. Of course, Trump's own daughter, we found out, registered in both Pennsylvania and New York. And I guess that's why this guy's an expert on voter fraud, because he's guilty of what Trump claims to be looking into. You can't write this stuff.
I mean, it's also kind of funny in a way, because when Donald Trump announced he was going to launch this major investigation into voter fraud, the media responded by saying, well, you must have some evidence here of significant voter fraud going on across the country. What do you have as evidence? If this is the guy he's going to cite, some right-wing ideologue, I mean, this is the best you can do. There's no credibility here.
There's no credibility whatsoever. And it is all, I mean, you start peeling back the layers of the onion, or opening up the Russian matryoshka dolls. Use whatever analogy you want. This is a guy who's been critical of deadbeat fathers, quote unquote, deadbeat fathers. He himself was accused of failing to pay child support. Basically, another deplorable grifter, which is mostly what Donald Trump's team is made out of. And speaking of voter irregularities, Philipps also said that he was registered to vote in Madison County, Mississippi. He wasn't actually on the voter rolls there, which is very, very odd. Trump's going to put the best people around him, remember? It is very, very clear that this entire voter fraud thing, maybe it wasn't originally conceived to push voter ID and restrict voting rights. It probably originally came from Trump's thin-skinned nature and insane ego. But now it's abundantly clear that Republicans are seeing this, quote, investigation as a way to justify even further curtailing of voting rights in advance of the next election. We have to be prepared to activate against that. I'll keep you posted as we find out more. Acting Attorney General Sally Yates decided to defy the White House and refuse to defend new travel restrictions targeting 7 Muslim-majority countries. Donald Trump immediately fired her. Yates said late last night that the Justice Department would not be defending the order against court challenges, saying that she did not believe it would be consistent with the institution's solemn obligation to always seek justice and stand for whatever is right. Yates was an appointee of President Barack Obama. She's, of course, by all indications, just days away from being replaced as Attorney General by Jeff Sessions. But after doing this, she was immediately fired by Donald Trump, sort of bringing the apprentice reality show to the White House, to the real world. Remember, the White House doesn't decide what's legal. And here's the amazing thing. When Sally Yates was confirmed, Trump's incoming attorney general, Jeff Sessions, seemed to want confirmation from Yates that she wasn't just going to rubber stamp anything that President Obama did, that she would actually evaluate the legality. Check out this exchange and think about how ironic this is now with the questioner Jeff Sessions incoming as Secretary of State.
Well, you have to watch out because people will be asking you to do things you just need to say no about. Do you think the Attorney General has a responsibility to say no to the president if he asks for something that's improper? A lot of people have defended the Lynch nomination, for example, by saying, well, he appoints somebody who's going to execute his views. What's wrong with that? But if the views the president wants to execute are unlawful, should the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General say no?
Senator, I believe that the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General has an obligation to follow the law and the Constitution and to give their independent legal advice to the president.
Some Trumpians are cheering the firing, saying, hey, Sally Yates wasn't doing her job because she should just be doing what the president wants. The job description is to prosecute and conduct all suits in the Supreme Court in which the United States shall be concerned, and to give his or her advice and opinion upon questions of law when required by the President of the United States or when requested by the heads of any departments. That means part of her job is you ascertain the legality of what it is that the president wants to do. This also wasn't just Sally Yates saying, hey, you know what? I'm just going to unilaterally act and not defend this. We had multiple courts that stayed part of Donald Trump's order. Her job is defend the Constitution. She sees the Constitution being at odds with the order from Donald Trump. If you want an attorney general that just agrees with the president, basically a rubber stamp, you don't actually need an attorney general.
It's kind of reminding everyone of the Saturday Night Massacre when President Nixon fired Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox for how he handled the Watergate investigation and wanting to subpoena those tapes. I mean, I don't know if there's a direct correlation there, but it's clear that any sort of defiance, any sort of dissent will not be allowed in the Trump administration.
That's the big picture I want to point to. The firing in and of itself, she was going to be gone in days. It's really not the biggest deal. The big deal is we're very quickly moving towards authoritarianism and beyond, as numerous experts have weighed in. I did a story about that yesterday. We've got total disdain for dissenting media, the silencing of science, right? The EPA climate science information, now a new demand for all climate data to be pre-cleared with politicians in the administration before publishing, removal and criticism of elements of the legal system that don't agree with you, a desire to have total control over media and the judicial system and over the elected officials that you will call out on Twitter if they don't do what you want. This is rapidly moving in a dangerously authoritarian direction. And whatever you think about Sally Yates, she's not the issue here, right? Her days were quite literally numbered at this point. This is about the broader direction of the country and the attempt to reduce separation of powers and checks and balances. I want to briefly talk about the Donald Trump anti-abortion order. You might remember that 2 days after the Women's March, Donald Trump signed this executive order which banned U.S. foreign aid to any health organization that provides or even discusses abortions with women. As usual, it's mostly optics because health organizations were already not allowed to use federal money to fund abortions. But now organizations that receive federal funding aren't even allowed to provide abortions that are funded by other sources. Not exactly small government conservatism, is it? And to be super clear here, even if Donald Trump hadn't signed this anti-abortion order, federal tax dollars still wouldn't have gone to fund abortions either way. This is just a way for Trump to help restrict women's access to abortions in the general sense. Ronald Reagan originally signed this order. Bill Clinton repealed it. George W. Bush then reenacted it. Barack Obama then repealed it. It's the epic political pendulum that's going on here. And many people are calling it the global gag rule because it prevents many organizations from even counseling women about abortion procedures or even referring women to someone else about them. They are not allowed to even discuss the procedure. And what many people in the U.S. don't get, particularly the people that are cheerleading this, is that international health organizations are more reliant on monetary aid from the US than any other country. And this is going to result in a number of organizations losing their funding. And this is Trump's far-right anti-abortion ideology having consequences in the real world. Some of us believe that Trump is not really anti-abortion right now. He's been pro-choice his entire life. Others believe, like Sarah Palin stated on the campaign trail, that Trump has seen the light and he truly is anti-abortion now. Really doesn't matter, Pat, because people are being negatively affected by this. Whatever Trump believes, he signed this and that has an impact.
No, and this also comes on the day where Donald Trump's going to announce his appointee to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And I think there's a litmus test there that they have to be in favor of overturning Roe versus Wade.
Planned Parenthood of Ghana lost hundreds of thousands in funding and had to cut 44% of their nursing staff. And this affected 1,300 communities in Ghana as a result of this regulation being active during the Bush administration. Just an example of how this has real world impact. But here's the real kicker. The order, which has been tried and tested for decades, does not decrease abortions. Check out this study from Stanford University, which actually points out that these are not regulations that effectively reduce the number of abortions that are happening. You have either less safe abortions take place. You have the so-called back alley abortion. You have abortions continued by these organizations just without having to refuse or distance themselves from aid from the United States. But this is yet another reason why we should be opposed to these types of regulations, because they don't reduce the number of abortions. Sex education, as well as access to contraception, reduce the number of abortions. Right-wingers are predominantly opposed to those ideas. Very, very sad. And this is really going to hurt real people. It's not just politics and Trump making a show of signing and holding up executive orders. Discuss this with us on Reddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Mayor David Narkewicz, mayor of the city of Northampton, Massachusetts, where the David Pakman Show started, no less, and also a city that is involved in the, I guess, somewhat confusing directive from the Trump administration's executive order with regard to so-called sanctuary cities. And Mayor Narkewicz, I mean, Maura Healey, the Attorney General here, has been very, very direct since, I think, November 9th, that she will do what is necessary to protect people, all people here in Massachusetts. What's your understanding of, as mayor, what you can no longer do or what you should be doing as a result of this executive order? Is it clear?
Well, thank you, David. It's great to be on with you. So, yeah, so-called sanctuary cities. When you actually read what President Trump's executive order said, it didn't actually effectuate any change. When you read it, he directs the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice to study or review ways to cut funding for sanctuary cities. So it didn't actually cut anything off. And as I've been saying for many months, I mean, first of all, what gets cities like Northampton and other cities in Massachusetts and across the country this designation is we've basically opted not to enforce what the Department of Homeland Security itself has said is an optional order, which is an administrative detainer request. We'll accept, a court order, we'll accept a warrant, but we will not hold people for up to 48 hours without charging them with anything at the behest of a bureaucrat in Washington. And that's really what the position of Northampton and many other communities who've been called these so-called sanctuary cities. That's really the position we've taken. So I am dubious that a city that refuses to do something, which in and of itself it cannot be required to do by the federal government. And this is on Fourth Amendment grounds. This is on 10th Amendment grounds. how we could then be penalized. So I'll be watching very carefully, like many other mayors and attorneys general, to see exactly what this review that the president's executive order has asked for yields.
And much of this has to do with individual decisions that police departments make, obviously in consultation with city councils, mayors, et cetera, in terms of cooperation with ICE agents. And I think the key point is the one you're getting at, which is that there is a range of ways in which police departments can choose to cooperate with ICE agents. And talk a little bit about sort of how this relates to the day-to-day of police, because a lot of this has to do with whether or not immigration status is even looked into during routine interactions with police. Is that right?
That's correct. And again, this gets back to the whole 10th Amendment question. And you know, whether or not the federal government can essentially deputize a local law enforcement agency to carry out federal programs. You know, our position is, you know, we have enough other responsibilities that we have to take care of as a local municipality, that we are then going to begin doing the work of federal agencies. And, you know, what I heard from members of our immigrant community was that, you know, these kinds of activities that are where they're conducted by local law enforcement really erodes trust in local law enforcement, that people begin to fear even people that are legal, you know, legally here with you know, green cards, et cetera, that they begin to fear even coming forward to the police or reporting crimes to the police. It's something that even the International Association of, you know, Chiefs of Police has spoken about about this issue of eroding trust. And so, you know, when I, you know, if David Pacman is driving through Northampton and gets pulled over, you're
Common occurrence.
Common occurrence, yes. You're going to be treated like any other citizen, and the same thing with somebody who, you know, may look foreign or maybe from another country. We are not in the business of asking people for their papers, you know, like Arizona tried to do a few years ago, and that law was struck down. I mean, this is the question, is that, you know, it's not the role of local police to fix the nation's broken immigration system. You know, I've been saying for years that rather than come up with these, you know, draconian measures to try to punish cities and towns, they should spend more energy on trying to fix the immigration system, which creates this whole universe of people that in many cases are law-abiding, they're paying taxes, they work here, they have family, they probably have children who were born here and are U.S. citizens, and are trying to get through the immigration system to become legal and hopefully become citizens. But they've sort of been a victim of that process. So, you know, again, the focus should be on fixing the immigration system, not on somehow deputizing local police officers to do the work of the federal government.
I'm curious whether, if there's been any direction or communication with the Massachusetts Attorney General, Maura Healey, there's been a sort of acknowledgement of the subjectivity of a lot of what is sort of implicit here. I mean, on the one hand, there's no legal definition for what is or isn't a sanctuary city. We're talking about different degrees, as I mentioned, of cooperation with immigration enforcement agencies. On the other hand, there's this, when it comes to what the federal government can or can't do in these cases, there's this 1987 case, South Dakota v. Dole, which says that the federal government can put requirements on states when giving them funding, but that it cannot be unduly coercive, which again is a term that has no sort of fixed objective definition. Is that part of the complexity here?
It's part of the complexity. I know that there have been interpretations of that particular case too that say that, you know, that some have argued that has to be part of the original intent of the legislation, that it can't just be cobbled on after the fact. So there's been differing interpretations. And again, this gets back to the whole issue of whether or not the president has the authority with the stroke of a pen to basically modify a series of laws that have been enacted by Congress. I mean, Title I, which is, you know, a program through the Department of Education that provides significant federal education dollars to Northampton, you know, that was created under a statute enacted by Congress. So and in many cases, that's a law that protects people. It's in place to ensure that people have access to an equal education. So I think it's going to get really complex when you start to deny people federal funding, that in some ways is embedded in our civil rights laws in terms of equal access, for kids with special needs, kids who are, from underserved populations, whatever it is, that it's going to really get complex. That the Congress is going to modify a law that's going to take funding for these folks away in some of the biggest metropolitan cities in America.
Yeah,
So
and you're sort of
attorney-
speaking to the impact, and there's another angle to that as well. And the Los Angeles mayor, Eric Garcetti, made this point, which is you can, as the federal government, clearly take away funding from specific programs if a city isn't adhering to the requirements of that program. But here what we're talking about is the removal of funding because there's not the degree and scope of cooperation between federal and local officials, which is a completely different ballgame.
Exactly. And that's what I was referring to about the interpretation of that other case, that you can put conditions on the education funding, and you can require, local districts to provide statistics and do reporting and fill out forms, which, believe me, they do. And you can put other, kinds of restrictions on how those funds are used. But this goes pretty far afield of imposing requirements on educators for education funding.
Have you been briefed, considered, thought about, or is it anywhere in this entire discussion, what, if anything, could be repercussions against individuals like mayors, for example, for not going along with whatever is ultimately directed after this so-called study takes place? I mean, is that something you're thinking about, or the Attorney General has discussed, for example?
I've talked to the Attorney General, and this isn't, we're not really at that level. I think at this point, a lot of what they're looking at are, again, these federal statutes, the underlying federal statutes for the programs that cities and towns receive funding from. During the campaign, Bobby Jindal was on the radio in Boston saying that, the mayors of Somerville and Northampton, et cetera, should be put in jail. I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric, but in terms of, again, I get back to Northampton's policy, and our policy is to exercise our option not to honor a form, which the form itself says voluntary on the form, these administrative detainer requests, which, the Department of Homeland Security put out a legal memo citing case law all around the country that raised Fourth Amendment issues with these particular detainer requests. So again, there seems to be this perception, or at least the rhetoric is painting a perception that, the Northampton police or other local municipalities are going to be, standing at the borders, and if an ICE official or a federal official comes into our city, we're going to somehow prevent them, or alternatively, that we are allowing people to act lawlessly or commit crimes or do, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, Northampton was recently involved in a major human trafficking case that occurred that was actually led by the Massachusetts Attorney General. We were one of the lead agencies that involved people. In this case, these were people that were undocumented in some cases that were being, trafficked by unscrupulous people. And we were right in the thick of that, investigating it. We helped to break that up. So again, we are not, there seems to be this perception that this is somehow a, get out of jail free card for anybody anyone who's an immigrant who commits a crime. And that is just not the case. What we want to do is we want to stay away from programs that ostensibly say that they're targeting violent criminals, but the vast majority of the evidence shows that's not who they're targeting. Yeah. And that's not who they have targeted. And that's not the kind of community that we want to have. We want to have a community that feels trusting of our police department and who's willing to work with us to keep all communities safe within the city of Northampton.
And of course, the big picture of this, and we won't even get into it, is the party of so-called states' rights coming in and saying,
Yeah.
hey, here's new stuff the federal government will now tell states that they have to do. Truly, truly stunning. Yeah.
I mean, the leading case on this now is a 1987 case. Was authored by none other than Donald Trump's favorite Supreme Court Justice,
Scalia.
Antonin Scalia. Who wrote an opinion which is sort of a continuation of the line of cases from a New York case, which it basically says, you can't, you cannot, this federal government cannot deputize, cannot commandeer is the language that he used. Of course, he used it in the context of Brady Bill and the federal government requiring municipalities to do federal work around gun control. But it's the same principles, and it's
Absolutely.
based on the same separation between, you've got the supremacy of the federal government, but anything not reserved to the federal government, by definition, is the purview of state and local and their subdivisions, which means local government. So, yes, it's always amusing to me how the party wants to get government out of our affairs. They want to, they don't want big government. They want to give power back to the states, except when they don't.
Absolutely. We've been speaking with Mayor David Narkewicz of Northampton, Massachusetts. We're going to keep following what ultimately comes of this, and I know you will as well. Thanks for talking to me about this.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me on, and much success to you in this show, which, as you said, started right here in the city of Northampton.
Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Friday was International Holocaust Remembrance Day. This was established by the United Nations back in 2005 on the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, used to spread awareness about the Holocaust. The White House put out a statement about this, and that statement notably did not mention Jews nor anti-Semitism, which is certainly odd. Of course, there were other victims in the Holocaust, gays, Romani, disabled people, but there's no question that the slaughter of 6 million Jews was the central genocide by the Nazis. And the statement uses the word Holocaust, so it doesn't seem like they were referring to all the killings of all groups, but they leave out who was the primary target of the Holocaust per se. You could say, well, maybe presidents generally don't mention Jews or anti-Semitism in these statements. That's wrong. Both Democratic and Republican presidents in the past have mentioned Jews as the victims of the Holocaust in these addresses. And there was a tweet sent out by Anti-Defamation League director Jonathan Greenblatt, who called this puzzling and troubling that Jews and anti-Semitism weren't mentioned in the statement. And this is where it gets really wacky. Even the Zionist Organization of America, which is a very pro-Trump Jewish group, expressed disapproval about this. Now, here's where it starts to take on a sort of weird tone, and we have to see if we're delving into the world of alternative facts and concocted narratives. Press Secretary Sean Spicer said that the statement was written by a Jew, so, it's okay, I guess. Take a look at this.
The statement was written with the help of an individual who's both Jewish and the descendants of Holocaust survivors. To suggest that remembering the Holocaust and acknowledging all of the people, Jewish, gypsies, priests, disabled, gays, and lesbians, it is pathetic that people are picking on a statement.
It's pathetic that people are pointing to a notable omission, and Politico is saying they've confirmed that Russian Jewish Trump aide Boris Epstein was at least partially involved in the writing of this. But that also could just be backpedaling. I mean, what difference does it make whether Boris Epstein was involved in the writing of this thing? It sends the wrong message, particularly, Pat, as we've talked about. Trump's presidential campaign attracted anti-Semites in a way that no recent presidential campaign has. Trump took many opportunities where he could have denounced the anti-Semitism and either didn't denounce it or tepidly denounced it. This is not about Trump being personally anti-Semitic. I doubt he is. His daughter is Jewish, one of his closest advisors. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is Jewish. It's not about that, but it is, again, about now Security Council member, I can't believe I'm even saying this, Steve Bannon, has a long history of coddling implicit and explicit anti-Semitic nonsense on Breitbart. We have a number of different anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish groups that have come to Trump's support. This could be yet another one of those wink, wink, nod, nod moments.
I'm not sure. I don't think it was anything deliberate. I mean, it was a 6-sentence statement. So I think if they were to add Jews, they may have felt obligated to also add the other minority groups that were involved.
Which would have added like 5 words, yeah.
Maybe. I mean, it would have been a whole other sentence, right?
It would have been one more sentence.
I think what might have been more offensive is the fact that it ends by saying that Trump will spread love and tolerance around the world. What from his first week in office would lead you to believe that?
That's hugely offensive, yeah. And I'm sort of saying tongue in cheek, right? I mean, I've been critical of just throwing around the term offensive, but yes, it's actually just factually wrong. It's there's no reason to believe at all that Donald Trump's presidency is going to spread love nor tolerance, and just all very, very weird. And it certainly, whether it was designed as a wink, wink, nod, nod to Trump's anti-Semitic fans, it is allowing the sort of plausible deniability that Trump is the so-called Jewish-controlled puppet or whatever that we see parroted on alt-right and other websites. So whether it's a coincidence or not, yes, the implications are different, whether this was just an oversight or a deliberate wink, wink, nod, nod. Either way, it's something that we should be concerned about. Hey, here's something that we really should be concerned about. If you are press secretary, what's your expertise in? Presumably, it's expertise in the press, media, how to work with media, different media outlets, and knowledge of them. Trump press secretary Sean Spicer retweeted an article from the widely known satirical news website, The Onion, which has been known as sort of the premier in the U.S., maybe even the world, satirical media outlet for about 10 years. And Sean Spicer retweeted an article from a video from The Onion as if it were real news. And not only that, it was an article making fun of Sean Spicer, not praising him. You really can't write this stuff. Check out the tweet from The Onion, which was then retweeted by Sean Spicer. The Onion tweet said, Sean Spicer's role in the Trump administration will be to provide the American public with robust and clearly articulated misinformation, right? Clearly slamming Sean Spicer. And Sean Spicer retweets it with, "You nailed it, period."
Kind of weird to end that period with an exclamation point.
It is weird. How is your press secretary, number one, unable to determine that a story he's promoting about himself is slamming him? But more importantly, number two, how is your press secretary not aware that you're retweeting a source as real news, which is the premier fake or satirical news site, arguably in the world? You might say, well, he was doing it sarcastically or tongue-in-cheek because he's clearly very savvy with technology. Sean Spicer's the same guy who tweeted out his password not once, but twice in 2 days. One day tweeting out N9Y25AH7, and the next day, the previous day rather, tweeting out capital A QENBPUU.
How does that happen?
I'm finding the silver lining, which is that Sean Spicer is using slightly more secure passwords than he might. Unfortunately, when you tweet them out publicly, the passwords become far less secure. And some people tweeting him back saying, you know, if you added some special characters, you'd be able to make your passwords even more secure. Sean Spicer, also like Donald Trump, has his Twitter account, the Twitter account for the press secretary of the United States, connected to his Gmail account, which you can see in this image that we are putting up for you. And it starts with PR. I wonder if it's like press secretary Trump at gmail.com or something like that. So total technical incompetence here from Sean Spicer. More seriously, this tech stuff is an issue because remember the Clinton email scandal, right? The Donald Trump senior staff was recently busted using private emails, which I talked to you about last week. This is the low information cadre of grifters. It's increasingly clear that the people running the country don't even seem qualified to run the local Boy Scout troop or PTA. No offense whatsoever meant to the local Boy Scout troop or PTA. These are not people who should be running the country, are they, Pat?
Probably not. You have to wonder if Sean Spicer is going to be out there for a couple months or so, embarrass himself completely, and then Trump will get rid of him.
We heard like within hours of Trump's inauguration that Trump was already complaining about Spicer's performance, trying to defend the indefensible, which was that Trump had record turnout at his inauguration. He's being sort of paraded out there in a really embarrassing way.
There's also reports that Trump put him out there deliberately to speak his words, and so that way Trump wouldn't be accused of lying, too.
Oh, right. Get somebody else to lie for you. That's good. Absolutely pathetic and just insane. And Sean Spicer very quickly becoming, quite frankly, the most embarrassing press secretary in a very long time of American history. We have a voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. Many people really liking the interview yesterday with pro-Trump libertarian Wayne Allen Root. Here's just one voicemail about that interview.
Hey, David, just saw your interview with Root. Thought it was great. One of the best back and forths I've seen, one of the best defenses from anyone in the news, and I've been watching a lot of news now, so just wanted to say thanks and keep up the awesome shows.
I enjoyed it. I mean, it was definitely an interesting interview. The guy had no real good arguments to make, and the audience really liked that interview. We should just do more of that type of thing.
Even though you disagreed with Wayne Allen Root, did this cause some liberal commentators and hosts to go after you in the same way that they did with Richard Spencer?
Oh, that I never should have even given him a voice because he's so deplorable. Not really. Not really. No, didn't see that. On the bonus show today, a Nigerian man with 86 wives, who we've talked about before, has passed away. Transgender boys are now allowed to join the Boy Scouts of America. We will discuss why any transgender boy would ever want to join the Boy Scouts of America in spite of the new rule, and much more. DavidPakman.com/membership. Get yourself instant access to the bonus show. It's a whole other show that we do every day for our paid members. And you can use the coupon code IVoted17 to get a huge discount off of your membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.